Well, hello everyone, and welcome to your first lecture for midterm summer semester 2020. This is going to be chapter 1, and in this chapter we're going to be covering medical word building, and we're going to be covering prefixes and suffixes also. So I'm doing these lectures in segments, unlike I would do in the actual classroom if we were at Cabrillo College. This first section is going to be about kind of the basics, kind of talking how we put medical words together in the most basic form, and then that will end this portion of the lecture. We'll come back and talk about prefixes and suffixes a little bit later on in a subsequent lecture. So let's get started on this one for right now. And this is a basic theory in medical terminology that applies, and that is that it's impossible to memorize all of these words as medical terms. It's too immense to try to pull in all that information and for it to be something you can just simply memorize. So the best way to approach medical terminology, which as I said before is learning a language, is learning the word parts, learning the 3 rules of how you build words, and then using that grammar and the spelling rules in order to assemble words. So what I'm going to do in this course is teach you the different pieces you need. The slide here uses a puzzle analogy. I prefer the Lego analogy. So if you're a Legos fan, great. If not, my apologies. But it kind of works the same way. We're going to assemble things in the way they go. So first of all, we're going to review the parts of speech very briefly here. This is just the basic rudimentary English 101 stuff. Nouns are persons, places, or things. In medical terminology, the nouns are going to be body parts, fluids, procedures, arm, leg, liver, spine, blood, bile, which is another type of fluid. Procedures could be a type of removal of something, so some sort of surgical procedure, or there's a suffix for that that we're going to learn called ectomy. So nouns cover body parts, fluids, procedures. They're going to kind of be the core of the words that we use. Verbs are action words: to inject, incise, ambulate. You may be familiar with that first word, inject, which literally means to inject. To incise is to cut, and to ambulate is to move or walk around. And I love the little cartoon here, verb, that's what's happening. So that's what it is. These are action words, as I said. As I go through this, by the way, I'm going to be giving you examples of words. I don't expect you to learn the words in terms of, or for example, inject, incise, ambulate. You don't need to know those yet. I do want you to be familiar with what a verb is. And then we have an adjective, and adjectives describe nouns. We're going to use suffixes in this class to modify nouns to get them to kind of do what we want to do. There's 2 different forms. I'm going to go to the second one you see listed here first, and this is called the pertaining to adjective, which uses suffixes, and there's 14 specific suffixes that all mean pertaining to. And when you attach them to a word, it just simply means that we're talking about that. For instance, if we want to talk about something that's going on with the stomach, we would start with the medical term for stomach, which is gastro, and then we would add ic to it. And instead of it being a standalone word saying gastro, which is saying stomach, gastric means pertaining to the stomach. So if you had an illness that was affecting your stomach, let's say gastritis, that would be a gastric type pathology or disease. So it would be pertaining to the stomach. Same with the spine. So we can talk about the spine being what it is. You can have an injection in your spine, and that would be called a spinal injection. Once again, we're using that pertaining to suffix to modify. And now we're talking about the spine as opposed to referring directly to the spine. If this doesn't make sense right now, that's perfectly acceptable. It's not going to completely make sense. Focus on the major part of the slide, which is the adjective. The other type of suffix we're going to use, and there's going to be a lot of these, is going to modify the word in certain ways to get it to do what we want it to do, as I said earlier. So for instance, the suffixes we see here, ible and able, right up here next to the word ability. If we take either of the suffixes and attach it to a word, let's say to digest, we can then modify it to talk about it. So we could say that we could eat something and we would digest it, and we would be saying that the food that we're eating is digestible, able to be digested. Once again, don't focus on the words I'm using here, just focus on the concept of the slide. Adjectives describe nouns. Now, let's jump into basic word construction. That was our quick review of English language. Basic word construction, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can take the word elements or parts and how we can assemble them together to make words. So here is where our puzzle piece analogy or our Lego analogy really starts to get some legs. In medical terminology, there are 4 basic word elements that we're going to be working with this semester. And really universally, they go all the way through medical terminology. These 4 elements are listed here. You might be familiar with the first 2 words, prefix and suffix. And then we also have word roots in combining forms. Do note here at the bottom, it says medical terminology is not difficult to understand when you understand how the elements are combined to form a word. That's really, really important because there will be times you'll want to express something about a particular body part. And if you know the appropriate prefix or suffix, you will be able to modify that word to say what you want. Inversely, you're going to see words from time to time that you have no idea what they mean, but I'm going to show you how you can break them down. And if you know your 4 word elements and you know how to define what those are within the word, you can figure out what that word is, even if you've never seen it before, or at least figure out most of the meaning. So let's start with prefix. And prefix is really going to be the focus of our study later in this lecture. A prefix is a word part that's located at the front of a word. Here you see in red, on top of the list, pre, which means before. Then we see natal, which means pertaining to birth. And if we put pre onto natal, we end up with the word prenatal, meaning pertaining to before birth. So you can easily see here how we've already taken a word and modified it. So natal is talking about the birth, but if we want to talk about what happens before the birth, we add pre, we have prenatal, pertaining to before birth. Once again, focus on the fact it's a prefix. Don't get caught up in the other information that you might be wondering about these words. 3 very specific points here at the bottom. Using a different prefix will change the meaning of a word. A prefix is denoted by using a hyphen at the end of the word. That's very important. So if you look once again at that top word in the list there, pre with the hyphen behind it, if I ask you for the definition of a standalone prefix, I'm going to expect you to also insert the hyphen at the end of the word so that I know that you know where that word is located in terms, or where that word part is located in terms of the whole word. So that's really important. A prefix is denoted by using a hyphen at the end of the word, and prefixes often indicate number, time, position, amount, or negation. So that's how they modify the word. In medical terminology, I would say probably around 40%, maybe even less, of the words will even have a prefix. Many of our terms that we'll be working with this semester don't have a prefix, and that's perfectly fine. As I said, not all words will have a prefix. So, idea behind some of the prefixes here. You see some words written out here. These are medical terms. This is not how we would normally write them. The slashes are in there to show you the different word elements. Right now we're focusing only on prefixes. So if you look at the first word, intermuscular, the prefix here is intra. Transabdominal, the prefix is trans. The word diarrhea, dia is the prefix. And prenatal, pre is the prefix. And post-surgical, post is the prefix. So that's kind of how it works in terms of how it's placed in the word. So the takeaway from all of this about prefixes is it comes at the front of the word, it modifies the word, and it requires a hyphen if you're going to present it in a standalone situation. That's really what you need to know about prefixes for right now. I'm going to discuss suffixes right now. We're not going to concern ourselves with learning them just yet. That's going to come in a later lecture. So suffixes are word parts located at the back of a word. Megaly is a fine example. You see it here in red. It means enlargement. We have a word here underneath that, cardio, and the slash in cardio should be there, and you're going to find out why it's there in just a moment. But for right now, just suffice it to say that cardio means heart. So if we want to talk about enlargement of a heart, we can take the word megaly, we can attach it to the word cardio, and now we have cardiomegaly, enlargement of the heart. Now, the beautiful thing about medical terminology is that you can express big ideas in a few words. I happen to be a fluent German speaker, and in German they do the same thing. They take what in English might be several sentences or a paragraph, and they can boil it down to one word. It's generally a very long word, but they can put it down into one word. It's called economy of language, and we're going to work with a lot of that kind of concept in terminology. So there's the information about the suffix. The 4 bullet points at the bottom are important. As using a prefix, using a suffix will also alter the meaning of the word. So we use different suffix changes to change the meaning of the word. In medical terminology, a suffix usually indicates a procedure, a condition, a disease, or a part of speech. And the suffix is denoted by using a hyphen at the front of the word. So note, just like the prefix, if I ask for a standalone suffix, I'm going to expect to see that hyphen in the front, so I know that you know where that belongs in the whole composition of the word, if you will. So some suffixes, and once again, focus on only where the suffix is positioned and how it works. Don't have to worry about memorizing these words yet. So chemotherapy, we have our suffix as therapy. Dermatology, we have logy. Periodontal, the suffix is al. In leukocyte, the suffix is cyte. And in cardiac, the suffix would be ac, which is a pertaining to suffix. So that's kind of how we work with suffixes. I'm going to go ahead and pause here, let you work a little bit with that material. In the next portion, when you come back, we're going to start talking about the other 2 elements we have here, the word root and the combining form. So I will be back with you in just a few moments.